Good morning, everyone, and welcome to those in London, and good afternoon to our guests in Dubai and Mauritius as well. And Kimanye, a very local term that I'll use to all those people in Mauritius listening. Today, you are joining us for Middlesex University. We are hosting a webinar here with three continents in one from Dubai, Mauritius, and the UK. And just to let you know, I just want to say a few house rules and set the tone before I begin. First thing is that this session is going to be recorded, so that for those of you who are listening. The second thing is that please feel free to use the chat function in this webinar. But if you have a question, please use our Q&A function. And if you want to direct it to one of our speakers, then please say that. And we will have a combination of questions that I'll ask, and we will make sure that your questions get answered. A couple of things I just wanted to say. So here we are. We're leading up to COP28, and Middlesex has a number of activities, and especially on the 5th of December in Dubai, which is climate and law. So it's worth keeping an eye on that. But you'll hear terms like the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. So just to give you a bit of an explanation, in year 2000, very quick history, we had the Millennium Development Goals. There were 8 kind of targets to improve the lives of the poorest people. Fast forward 2015, now they've been replaced by 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So we've been working towards that and ensuring that, we're working towards those goals. And they're kind of, what I would say is, by working on Sustainable Development Goals, there's many interpretations, but we're kind of trying to work towards achieving a better, more sustainable future. So before I introduce the guests, what I'd always say is that we have Dubai with amazing technology. We have Mauritius, which is an island which is going to be affected by climate change, and especially with issues such as flooding as well. That's going to be really important. So we're going to do a series of webinars throughout the academic year to try and highlight all these kind of issues. And we have Barnet with their Zero Challenge campaign, which they will explain in a bit more detail. But they're looking to be one of the best London boroughs, for net zero. So before I make a start to our panelists, I just wanted to introduce our Vice-Chancellor, Sean Wellington, just to say a couple of words. So Sean, I'm putting you on the spot, but did you want to say a couple of words before we begin?
Thanks, Rabin, and thanks for your introduction. I'm really delighted to be here and to listen to at least a little and take part at least part of the conversation. I'm afraid I've got another meeting I need to dash off to at 11. My diary is a bit bonkers today, but really important topic. I, as you know, keenly committed to environmental sustainability. I campaigned for the university signing up to the UN SDG Accord, and I was really pleased we did that as part of the work on developing the strategy to 2031, and I also led a lot of the work on identifying and developing our 3 global themes, one of which is concerned with sustainability. So it's been a real and continues to be a real passion of mine. You may have seen I wrote a blog post for London Higher, which I commend to you if you haven't had the opportunity to see it. And I think that I mentioned in that some of the things that we're doing across our global community. But I absolutely agree, as a university community, as a global community, we need to be actively engaging and leading discussion and debate on this is absolutely crucial topic.
Thank you, Sean. So it's going to be hard to beat that as a great opening statement. And it's true. We are trying to work towards and working within the community to do that. So I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. And the opening question really is, how's your organisation working towards COP28 and meeting the SDG goals? So Maheen, as our distinguished guest as well, would you like to have an opening statement?
Yes, hi. Good afternoon. Well, good morning, actually, for those who are in London. Good afternoon for those who are in our part of the world in Dubai. My name is Maheen Rizvi Ahmed, and I'm a senior lecturer in the School of Law at Middlesex University of Dubai. And we are, of course, the host city for COP28 this year. And as a university, we have been very involved for a number of months now in the lead up to COP28. It's very important, of course, to sort of highlight in terms of the university that our engagement with issues around sustainability have proceeded, of course, the conference in terms of our curriculum. I teach, of course, on the Masters on Global Governance and Sustainable Development, but we also have a number of different modules and courses that embed sustainability in the curriculum. I'm also going to talk about the university as a member of the United Nations Global Compact, the first university in the region to sign up onto the UNGC, as well as a number of initiatives that we've held in the last couple of years in terms of sustainability. But of course, specifically in terms of COP28, Middlesex University, along with the Climate Law and Governance Initiative and the University of Cambridge, is going to be hosting the Climate Law and Governance Initiative Conference on the 5th of December. The conference is going to be held in a hybrid model, so those people who are in Dubai as well as online. And the focus of the conference is, and of course, on climate change, climate law and governance. We're expecting a number of different speakers focusing on different areas in terms of climate change, the legal process on climate change, promoting the public and private contributions to climate change and net zero. We have speakers coming in from a number of different organizations, both public and private, including the United Nations Environmental Programme, the IUCN, the Green Climate Fund, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, along with a number of universities, including the University of Cambridge, King's College, Stanford University, and of course, Middlesex University, Dubai as well. If we could move on to the next slide, yes, I think I can do that. In terms of Middlesex University, we are focusing, of course, on looking at one very key aspect of COP28, as well as in terms of the themes of the conference, which is, of course, the role of the private and public sector in terms of the legal and financial contributions towards net zero. It's very important to understand that the UAE, being a primarily an oil-producing country, is the first country in the region to sign up to net zero. And of course, this will require a major transition in terms of both the economy from a legal as well as financial perspective. So the focus of our panel discussion, for example, is looking specifically in terms of the legal and regulatory changes that need to take place, as well as the role of companies like ADNOC, which is, of course, the leading oil and gas company in the Middle East, and how they are part of that transition as well. We're going to be looking at issues around transparency and accountability in terms of companies and their sustainability initiatives, because, of course, this is, again, a major concern. And so this is kind of the main focus of our conference. And of course, I'm happy to share the link in terms of registering for the conference. Those of you who would like to attend online, it would be great as well. The next slide, please. In terms of student engagement, so, we have really sort of ensured that our students are involved in the conference as well. So we have students who will be attending the conference as rapporteurs, and they will be part of the contribution towards the white paper that we released after the conference. We're also using the conference as a springboard for a lot of our student initiatives and different programs. So this is just some examples of, this is, I think, this is our graphic design department, which have created a number of posters and campaigns on thrifting, on reusing, on recycling. So these are some of the initiatives that the students have been involved in as part of their various modules during the academic year. And if you look particularly at the lanyards at the bottom, so our conference is trying to be as green as possible. It's going paperless. We have our fashion students have actually created these lanyards made out of the old tablecloths that we had at Middlesex, and using paper. I think it's some sort of recyclable paper that they're using. So we're no longer going to have any of the plastic lanyards. We're having everything is going to be reusable, recyclable at the conference. So it's important for us to show that this is part of our kind of ethos as well, and it goes beyond the conference. Next slide, please. In terms of overall engagement, as part of COP28, the overall focus of COP this year has really been about bringing universities into the entire conference itself. So COP28 created what is called the University Climate Network. This is a network of 38 universities based in the UAE, including a number of foreign universities like NYU and Paris Sorbonne, and Middlesex University is also part of that engagement. And the focus of the University Climate Network is providing access to our students to COP, as well as giving opportunity for us researchers to get involved in the various initiatives that are taking place in COP28. So of course, our key initiative is the climate conference, but we have our students who are attending the conference, including access to the Blue Zone, as well as a number of different lecturers who are presenting at various opportunities during the conference itself. All of this material is, of course, available on the COP website, but it really does sort of get our students to engage in terms of the issues that they study in the classroom and to hopefully be part of the conference over the next 2 weeks as well. The next slide, please, Billy. Thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of the Institute of Sustainable Development. Andrew McKinsey, who's the head of the Institute, unfortunately cannot be here, but we did set up the Institute, I think, almost a decade ago. And the focus of the Institute is on a number of issues in terms of student engagement, but also in terms of research, as well as training for a number of different companies in the region. So just on the top of my head, for example, we've been working with DHL and their senior managers in the Middle East and North Africa over a number of years in terms of training them in terms of sustainability and helping them develop the KPIs necessary to sort of engage with these issues around sustainability, climate change, diversity, inclusion, etc. The Institute also is involved in a number of different campaigns, whether it's with regard to recycling, waste on campus, etc. Next slide, please. Sorry, I'm rushing a little through. I'm aware of time. The Middlesex University was the first university in the region in the Middle East to sign on to the UN Global Compact. And we have, over the last 3 years, released very detailed reports in terms of our communication on engagement, talking about how we have embedded sustainability into our operations, into our curriculum, in terms of research and student experience as well. These reports cover all aspects of the university, and what we've tried to showcase is, of course, all the progress that we've made, but also highlight the areas that we still need to focus on in terms of course, in terms of our campus, especially, our climate, our carbon footprint, our wastage, etc. And those are initiatives we are looking to work with the UN Global Compact in the next couple of years. Next slide, please. And then finally, just to quickly sort of end with what we're doing. So these are just kind of 2 initiatives that have just taken place this week. Yesterday, we had, what culminated was a couple of days of a hackathon, a climate change hackathon that was taking place by a number of our different students that are presenting on how to measure climate change, how to be able to address what the key issues are in terms of climate change. And what we saw was tremendous student engagement in terms of different teams that participated, and a lot of, we had some very interesting guest lecturers and speakers from various industries in the UAE who were really interested to see how we are sort of prioritizing these issues around climate change and sustainability, and what are some of the really interesting and innovative ideas our students are focusing on. We had also on the left, there's another environmental recycling waste campaign, and a kind of a panel discussion that took place as well, that was led by Andrew, including some of our partners, Simply Bottles and EnviroServe. So these are just some of the initiatives that we had just focused on this week in the lead up to COP, but of course to also highlight the fact that these are things that we've been doing throughout the year and have continued to do so in the past as well. And then finally, I think that's it. I don't know if there's any more slides. No, I think that's it. So just a very quick overview. We're looking forward, of course, to the conference in terms of student engagement, in terms of faculty engagement, but also in a sense of trying to show the overall focus of the UAE and Dubai, especially in the lead up to COP28. So thank you so much, and look forward to hearing from the rest of you as well.
Thank you, Maheen. So those are very detailed account, and really enjoyed that. And the things that stood out for me, for those of you who are thinking of posting questions, is that I like the fact that you talked about accountability and transparency. That's really important in the Net Zero Challenge. That really is. And that student engagement, that education piece. And that really came out really strong. So those of you thinking about asking questions, put it in that Q&A and I will certainly try and answer that questions. But over to Gifran and talk about Mauritius as well. Small island, but I'm sure he can explain a bit about it and what Mauritius are doing over there. Over to you.
Right. Thank you, Rabin, and thank you, Mahin, for that great presentation. Thank you again for having me. I'm Gufran Rostam. I teach in the International Foundation Program in Middlesex University, Mauritius. So Middlesex University, Mauritius has been founded in 2009. I'm sorry. We have around 2,000 students and around 100 staff members, including 50 academics. So we are a branch campus in line with UK's approach to transnational education, right? We were established specifically by Middlesex for the African and Mauritian market. So we follow the same educational framework as Hendon, but also put a particular focus on inclusive education. And this inclusivity is shown in our affordable services to have students achieve better. So basically, we have a more competitive prices in terms of our tuition fees. So it's good to note that 1 out of 5 international student in Mauritius is a student at Middlesex, 20%. Also good to note that last year, 73% of our students graduated with a good award, that is either distinction or upper second class. So coming back to Mauritius, as you may already know, Mauritius is part of the small island development states. As you may already also know, SIDS such as Mauritius face a disproportionate burden of climate impacts across the world. And in the context of COP28, and not necessarily related to Middlesex, but the country has been preparing itself to participate in the conference. So some public officials, for example, public sector officials and civil society representatives were trained to handle international climate negotiations by the Commonwealth through the Commonwealth Climate Health Access Hub. With regards to government, recently in the last meeting of the Private and Public Joint Committee organized by the Ministry of Finance, Economic Planning and Development, they launched something called the Sustainable Finance Framework for Mauritius. Our campus director, Professor Johnson van Rensburg, was present at that meeting. And it's really in line with, fulfilling its commitments, for example, made in COP26 to achieve 60% of renewable energy by 2030 on the island. Besides this, the Bank of Mauritius have been launching recently guidelines for green bonds, sustainable bonds, basically, which is aimed at increasing capital to finance or refinance green or social or sustainability-linked projects. So even if we were not directly involved in COP28 as much as Dubai has been this year, we strive to contribute to the sustainable development goals in our operation, teaching and learning, research and innovation. I'll try to be brief. I'll start with the research. We have several locally funded research projects that are focused on sustainability, including, for example, a GIS, a Geographical Information System research project looking into the impact of sea level rise in Mauritius, and that is being led by Professor Girish Bikaru and Aditya Santokhi in partnership with the University of Technology of Mauritius. Professor Bikaru has also been involved in developing an interactive mobile-based personal carbon footprint calculator specific to Mauritius. Another of our academics, Dr. Amar Siam, has been doing research on energy monitoring and IoT, Internet of Things, smart home platforms. He's also been involved in bettering monitoring techniques to measure air quality in real time. When it comes to our facilities here, we have moved to a new campus in 2017 in Ficonflac, the west coast of the country. But our student population keeps growing. So to accommodate that growing student population, a previous cafeteria was converted into a new learning center instead of building a new one, for example, right? We've renovated a different building and implemented several sustainability measures, including, using eco blocks to reduce energy consumption, to prevent thermal transfer, using reflecting waterproofing membrane and thermal insulation, using infrared motion sensors to reduce AC use. What's interesting in the building I am right now also is that we have a little orchid of fruit trees, local fruit trees, that was planted to increase shaded areas outside and allow students to harvest fruits. It's still at its infancy, so it's still growing. We don't have fruits yet, but it's coming. We also have a plan to build a new building, and that building will certainly be including many green building principles, including passive cooling and lighting, for example. Besides this, we use, smart electricity meter in several building blocks in Mauritius on our campus, UV filtering of windows, extractive fans, grey water to irrigate our green spaces. In terms of our organizational practices, we made a deliberate decision to avoid unnecessary waste like printing, and we are really moving towards paperless. Cafeteria and catering services have banned plastic bottles, cutlery, and packaging. So really strive to be plastic free on campus. Recently, the staff members have been offered a reusable cutlery set, which was MDX branded, and also traveling mugs. So basically, Middlesex University Mauritius is also engaging, local initiative. For example, something called Signature. It's a rough translation of signature, so it's a play on word of signing nature. So it's a pledge that has been devised by an organization called Business Mauritius. Business Mauritius is an independent association that represents over 1,200 local businesses. So we were one of the first signatories to that particular pledge, and we strive to put it into practice. And I'll end with student engagement on campus. So students, as you may already know, as from the foundation program, are made aware and educated about the sustainable development goals, right? And besides this, they've been and continue to be involved in a number of cleanup projects around the beaches, for instance. We've also had Green Week a couple of years ago in line with COP26 to increase awareness on the climate crisis, youth empowerment, and education. We have a student club called the Earth Society that has a herb garden called the Eden Garden, where they can sell their produce to fund various projects. And that's it. That would be it for me. I'm here if you have any questions, and I thank you a lot for your attention.
Very detailed response, and a couple of highlights I'd like to really stand out is that the nature. Mauritius plays a really vital part of the whole planet. Coral reefs is one of our natural protections against climate change. That's obviously going to be affected with a rising temperature. So if you've got questions to answer, Gilfran, please post them in the chat. So over to our next guest as well, Yogita, with Barnet. Again, some really great work. So Yogita speak from the horse's mouth. Welcome, Yogita.
Morning, everyone. My name is Yogita, and I'm the Assistant Director for Sustainability at Barnet. Let me tell you a bit about Barnet for those of you who might not know. So Barnet is in the northwest of London. We are one of the largest boroughs in London with almost 390,000 residents that live there. We also have 85,000 micro businesses. So those are businesses that have less than 5 people working in them. And that's the largest 85% of our businesses are micro businesses. So a huge borough. We have some of the largest transport routes through our borough. So we have the M1 that goes from London up north. We have the A41, which goes across London. So we have these huge transport routes that mean we've got a lot of cars coming through our borough. So a local authority is in a very unique and very special place in the sense that we have this absolute opportunity and the privilege to convene and empower and influence across the borough. So we have a target to be an operational net zero council by 2030. So that means everything that we have direct responsibility and all of our suppliers to be net zero by 2030. But then as a borough, we need to be net zero by 2042. So what that means is influencing anyone that works, studies, or lives in the borough to be net zero. So it's a massive task. So about 18 months ago, we set ourselves a vision to work together in becoming one of London's most sustainable boroughs. And together is very much at the heart of everything we do. And I'm going to talk through some of the work we've been doing with Johan and Dominic in the next few minutes, because we've been working really closely with Middlesex University over the last 12 or 18 months. And that relationship is just growing and growing. And I'll put some more detail in the chat. So when we set our vision to become one of London's most sustainable boroughs, we were like, what does that actually mean in practice? So that means about being a vocal climate leader, having an opportunity to be on this panel with amazing people to really talk about the stuff that we're doing, but learning from each other. We were very, very keen to make sure that we take action that delivers tangible outcomes, but that we're very agile. So we know that this is a changing landscape that changes all the time, and what's relevant now may not be relevant next week. So we need to be very much agile in that. We also need to be really keen, really sure that everything we do doesn't negatively impact not only the generation now, but our future generations. Everyone talks about future generations, but actually there's a generation now that we need to make sure. So that equity piece is so important to everything we do. But most importantly, how do we support our residents and businesses to make those sustainable choices? So we have 156 actions across 9 themes of delivery. So the first is housings and buildings, and how do we make sure that our housings are all sustainable, have the most efficient EPC ratings. So for those of you who don't know what EPC ratings are, it's those energy ratings that we give our buildings. Around our transport, so we know that 70% of our transport emissions are for vehicles that do not start or finish in the borough. So those are those people going through the borough to go somewhere else. So actually, how do you influence those 70%? How do we work with the TfL, Transport for London, to make sure that those the buses that are in our borough are sort of electric, or we've got more train routes? And so we're about to launch a Brent Cross West next week, which will be a brand new train station in our borough that will really help us link to outer London. And we are working on a net zero town called Brent Cross, looking at renewable energy and working with colleagues in Middlesex University to think about what are our energy providers and how do we work together to get the best outcomes. There's a whole bit about waste and sustainable consumption. So Mahini, you're talking about how we repurpose products. So it's how do we think about sustainability when we're thinking about food and the way we recycle or the way we reuse or repurpose. There's a huge bit about business and skills. I've talked about our micro businesses in the borough and how we've got so many, but how do you influence those micro businesses or actually promote those micro businesses to be greener? And those skills, so working with higher education providers like Middlesex University and Barnet and Southgate College, who are also within our borough, to ensure that our residents and the students within our borough have got those green skills. And then around the natural environment and thinking about adaptation and mitigation and resilience, because actually this is happening. We are going through a climate crisis at the moment. So how do we adapt and how do we become more resilient? And then most importantly, our communities and partnerships work. So how do we bring our communities and partners together? Because if Middlesex University has a target that's way off 2042, it means that as a borough, we won't be 2042. So really working with colleagues at the university, but also our wider partners through health, the police, other universities. We've got Saracens in the borough. So how do we all work together? And then internally, thinking about our supply chain, our investments, and I think we talked about some of the pension work that you're talking about, and our staff and our policy work. So really thinking about that, but most importantly, thinking about that comms and engagement piece. So next week, no, tomorrow, actually, the eve of COP, we are launching our recommendations to our Citizens' Assembly. So earlier this year, we had a Citizens' Assembly, and we did that in collaboration with Dominic and Johan at Middlesex University, who did an independent evaluation of our Citizens' Assembly for us, which looked at bringing 40 adults, 18 and over, and 20 young people aged 12 to 17 in a room that answered the question of, you know, Barnet wants to, we've got a target to reach net zero, and how do we work together to become more sustainable? And they gave us 20 recommendations over 5 themes. And I will put the recommendations link in the chat for you very shortly. But those recommendations, we're working on how we actually deliver them, and it's having an action plan that's community-based. So tomorrow, with partners and community colleagues, we are going to be launching those responses and thinking about what the next steps are. And then on Monday week, sorry, it all is blurring at the moment. So to coincide with COP, Middlesex University and Barnet, along with our sponsors at NatWest Bank and Microsoft and Brent Cross, launched a Barnet Zero Challenge. So we looked at the recommendations that came out of our Citizens' Assembly, and we have asked anyone who lives, works or studies in the borough to come up with innovative ideas of how we deliver those recommendations. And as at today, we've got 63 ideas that have come through, which is fabulous. You've got 24 hours. So if you've got an innovative idea, we really want to hear from you. And I'll put that in the chat in a minute as well. So 24 hours, get your ideas in. You know, let's see if we can absolutely break the barrier on the number of ideas we get. And we will be launching the next phase of that, which is about learning and working with Chris and Kurt at Middlesex University to really develop those ideas before we actually launch them. And then next year, as part of London Climate Action Week, we will be launching a Barnet Climate Action Month. So working with all of the faculties at Middlesex University to really showcase all of the sustainable work. We're really on our journey to becoming one of London's most sustainable boroughs, and we really, really want to work with you to get there. So please join us on our journey.
Thank you, Igit, for a very comprehensive, sort of detailed response into what Barnet's happening. As you can tell, a lot's been happening, but a few things to highlight there was, I like the fact that you talked about being agile, having adaptability, being flexible, because climate change is impacting now. When you look at all over the world, dengue fever in, Southeast Asia, for example. So it's happening now, and how are we going to respond? And I felt you were very on the ball with a number of things, and I like the fact that you're talking about bringing targets together and working with the wider partners. So please get your questions ready as well. So we're going to over to Johan as well, who are very Hendon Hub, and I'll let you introduce yourself, Johan. You've got a tough act to follow from all these amazing speakers.
Absolutely, absolutely. I won't even try. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone in the webinar today. My name is Johan Siebers. I'm a professor here on the Hendon campus of Middlesex University, and I am also the university theme lead for sustainable communities and the environment, or I think the official title is Sustainability of Communities and the Environment. So what I try to do, the university has a 10-year strategy. What I try to do is to shape that theme across research, teaching, learning, and public engagement. We have 3 themes. Sustainability is one of them. Enterprise and culture is another, and equity in health and well-being is the third theme. And you can tell already from these themes that they are big societal systemic challenges that are affecting the world in a global way. We try to use the knowledge and the expertise and the relationships that we have to make a positive change with respect to these themes. Today we're focusing on sustainability, but of course the other themes are part and parcel of that whole thing. What we've heard today already in the 3 previous speakers in the talks that they gave is that you cannot address sustainability of the environment without looking at social justice, without looking at sustainable and thriving communities, and without taking a global lens of how different social systems influence each other. So we try to work on all those areas. The Hendon campus is not different from the other campuses. We've also signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals. We try to change our operations into being sustainable, hopefully even a long time before 2042. But let's say that is an absolute deadline to achieve that. I hope we can move faster than that. And we do that in partnership with organizations and communities all around the world. We've heard a lot about that as well. There is the local sphere here in Hendon. Of course, we have seen just how closely we are working together with Barnet, with the Borough Council, but also with the Borough in a wider sense, and that applies to our other campuses. But we're also trying to work not just at the local level where behaviors have to change and we have to get people on board with this agenda and help communities to understand how they can become sustainable and what that requires in terms of day-to-day living. But we're also looking at this other end of the spectrum, which is the systemic part, the global frameworks that are necessary to allow communities to do this. And I think our 5 December Day on climate law and governance is a really good example of how we try to use our expertise and knowledge in partnership with others to look at that level of global systemic frameworks that we need to adapt in order to make a sustainable future possible for everyone. So we also try to contribute to the ideas development around sustainability and how to deal with the global climate emergency. And let me maybe just, because I want to have time for our conversation, so let me just end on one general point. We've been talking a lot about, or let's say, there is a lot of talk, and I think it's very important, around where the responsibilities lie of individuals, of communities, of states, of social systems, of businesses, of all sorts of actors in the social world. And I think that's very necessary. Talking about responsibility means that we talk about this togetherness that Yukita emphasized so strongly, and we are responsible to others in our actions and in legitimizing our actions. So only by looking at the frameworks of responsibility can we really change the way we live together. But on the other hand, that's kind of a limiting factor. On the other hand, there's not just responsibility, there's also hope. We also have to have an energizing vision that we can actually make a better future. That we can becoming sustainable or tackling climate change is not putting a damper on human development. And I think right now, especially in children and young people, all around the world, there is a huge anxiety with respect to the future. There's almost a deficit of hope in the light of all the misery that is spouted out on a daily basis. And I think one of the key challenges of COP28, of the COP that's taking place this year, is to address that balance or that relationship between being responsible and being hopeful, and how we can manage those two things. Because if we don't attack or address the mental health effects of the climate emergency, I don't think we can do any of these other things. So that's just a thought, maybe to end this part of the webinar. We can go into the panel discussion. Thanks very much.
Brilliant, and we will now. This is time for discussion, get the questions. But I just want to highlight a few key points, Johan. Just a couple of points. Influence is going to be really important, and the thing is, it's probably going to be our next webinar. Is mental health is going to be important for climate change. I think it's an under-tackled issue about well-being and climate change, because in order to get all these actions for climate resilience, we need good mental health and well-being, and that is essential. Those fundamentals are essential. All right, so I'm going to ask questions to each of our panelists. So Maheen, as well, I'm going to ask you a question first as well. And actually, I'm going to ask you in the chat. Mary had this question. It's very interesting to hear about the training that Dubai Institute for Sustainable Development is providing. Might there be scope for collaboration with Hendon colleagues, perhaps towards CPD provisions that could benefit MA students?
Well, I can't speak. I mean, I guess Andrew would have been the better person to answer this, but I think absolutely. I mean, I think collaboration is between the campuses is absolutely key. Mary and I have actually worked on some initiatives that Hendon has, of course, spearheaded. And totally, we can look into it. We know we have had a lot of interest by both our students as well in terms of extending the curriculum, but also in terms of a number of companies here that are looking at training opportunities, and therefore, taking the expertise from the various campuses makes a lot of sense. So we can absolutely have this conversation when Andrew is back, definitely.
All right, so I'm going to probe you with another question then. So how can we work, Maheen, how can we work towards a future where the principles of inequalities are tackled more effectively?
Well, I think coming back to the point that Johan made, I mean, we think about COP this year, a lot of focus is on climate justice. And I think that is one of the kind of key themes that often gets hidden in the conversation when we're thinking about, for example, the impact of climate change on some of the least developed countries in the world, and trying to build up their resilience and capacity in this area. So I think we have to sort of take we have to focus on the people that are being impacted and not so much in terms of net zero or these kind of broader terms and strategies that are being, that are important, absolutely, and commitments are needed. But I think it has to be about individuals that are being currently impacted. I come from Pakistan, and this is a country that has been affected by climate change tremendously. And we don't have the resilience and the capacity. Every year we have monsoons, every year, the rebuilding starts, but it's the sort of rebuilding that's being done. But most importantly, it's terms about the people who are the most impacted by it, who are often the poorest in our country, agricultural workers, migrant workers. And unless the kind of focus isn't on these people, I just feel that, a lot of it is just kind of words and promises. And I think hopefully at this COP, there will be a focus on that in terms of the climate fund that was agreed last year in Sharm el-Sheikh. So, I mean, I'm always trying to be optimistic. My students always ask me these questions in class. And I just feel that as long as we can start prioritizing these issues, mental health, climate refugees, for example, a term that we talk about in migration, it's a new category of refugees, right? So we need to understand that these are real people whose lives are being impacted. And I think that is where the focus has to be in terms of the decisions that are being made, but also in terms of how, as we as academics, sort of bring that into the conversation in our classes and sort of try and get the next generation, which I think is optimistic. I think they really believe in the message, and I think they realize that they have power with social media, especially to put forward the agenda. Sorry, that was a bit of a rambling answer. I'm not sure if I answered the question correctly, but it's one of those areas where I just feel that a lot can be done, but it's about engagement. I think that's a key thing.
Well, as you said, we've got work on now. I agree with that, but you've really highlighted the point about the next generation, because the next generation is essential, really, to not carry out the same mistakes that we have. And that leads on to Gifran as well. I want to get you involved in this conversation. There's been lots of talks about growing trees, etc., which is brilliant. But something that Maheen said, I remember with the old spillage in Mauritius, which happened a couple of years ago, left them exposed. So I guess, these are general issues, but the question I wanted to ask you for now is, how can we promote healthy behaviours in Mauritius in regards to the goals of COP28?
Right, great question. Thank you so much. I would dare to say that it's through positive reinforcement, right? Instead of only taking a punitive approach towards, for example, pollution. Is there any way that we could promote and push forward those who are actually doing positive things for their communities, right? And it's also in line with what I can see in the Q&A. It's this notion of deficit of hope. And I think that this is cross-cutting, right? Across the world, people are feeling that feeling of hopelessness. How can we make sure that we get together by, again, putting forward the positive things that could be done, and make young people understand that even the little steps matters, right? Thank you.
And just one quick question: Who maintains the orchid of mangoes, goyavs? I imagine, is it lychees as you're describing? Who maintains all this? Because Rona is interesting to know.
Yes, unfortunately, I don't have a picture, and even if I took one, it's a very rainy today. The building, we just got into that building less than a year ago. So it just got planted. I'm pretty sure it won't be until 3 or 4 or 5 years that we'll be able to get some mangoes there, right? But usually there's a team of people who would, how do you call that? The landscapers.
Yeah.
They're here to help out. However, we have another different herb garden that is being maintained by students, actually. The reason why we put some fruit trees in front of that building is because we're on the West Coast, so we get that full sunshine during the afternoon until the sunset. So it really helps to, it will really help to bring some shade on the building, but also to for the students. But the other thing is that it's low maintenance, right? A mango tree is just grows, and that's one of the reasons why they've put that here. They put that here as well.
Brilliant. I think I might head off to shops afterwards to get some mangoes, and that's a very
Absolutely
interesting question. Yogita, can I bring you into this as well? And the question I want you to ask you is, what behaviours and practices should campaign target for positive environmental impacts? So, in terms of
Yeah, so one of the things with our Barnet Zero campaign was very much a campaign by the community for the community. So if you see someone that looks like you, behaves like you, lives like you, doing something, it makes it easier. So rather than us being very top down and saying, you must do, it was very, so when you see our campaign, and I've put the link in it, well, Dominic's put the link in the chat for us, you will see that that campaign was very much like our residents who have done something slightly differently, our local businesses who've done something slightly differently. And it's moving away from those really big, you've got to retrofit your house conversation to, do you know what, why don't you just walk, tomorrow, and don't take your car? And what is our local environment like? And how do we make it safer for people to walk? So it's moving away from those really hard things to do, but doing those slightly, don't eat meat once a week, for example, and then that becomes a habit, and you're doing it because it's, it's easy to do. And one of the things I've always said was that if you make something easy to do, you will do it, right? So if you are going to get an electric vehicle and you've got electric charge points available, you will do it because it's easy to go and get your car fueled up or electrified or whatever you call it, charged up. So in Barnet, we're going to have 2,000 electric vehicle points by April 2024, which is massive. It's a huge amount of work that's going on in there. So that's one of the first things. And then I think it's moving the messaging away from this is the impact on climate, because quite a lot of our climate impacts are also impacting on you socially and on your health. So how do we work with colleagues in health to say, by changing the way we do this, this is the positive impact on your health as well. So it's just sort of thinking about the way we message. And I put a little bit of a comment in, one of our colleagues on the call talked about young people and how we really need to listen to them. So when we did our young people's assembly, the young people were saying, but no one listens to us. Like, we say all this stuff and everyone ignores us. Well, actually, we need to listen to these young people. They're really, really passionate and they really, really understand what's going on. And if we're dedicated to supporting future generations, how do we hear their voices? So at Barnet, one of the things we're doing is we're working with those young people to develop a social media campaign, which was one of the things they wanted to do. And what they want to do is sort of say, the young people of Barnet are calling you to action. You need to do something differently. And we're really listening to them and working with that, because if we're going to be supporting our future generations, let's listen to what they've got to say to us.
Absolutely, as well. I'm just going to ask, I'm going to ask you, Johan, next, but I'm just going to ask Maheen a couple of questions because she's going to have to head off. So I'm going to try and get them in. So here's my first question I wanted to ask you, Maheen, is when it comes to deploy renewable energies in UAE, is there a percentage number on this? And also, is UAE the lead? How's it leading when it comes to renewable energy deployment in the region?
Okay, so I as far as I know, so the UAE is kind of scaling up to 2050 in terms of net zero. So as far as I know, currently, it's around 10% of its entire energy mix is based on renewables, and that is primarily solar energy. But it's also working now on waste to energy. So just recently, the UAE has set up Dubai has actually set up the largest waste to energy plant in the country. So that's one area. They're also looking at in terms of natural gas, but the overall goal is by 2030 to have 20% of total energy to be through renewables, and then of course scale that up till 2050. But of course, it's a huge transition for an economy that is primarily based on oil and gas. There's no doubt about that. And I think one of the key themes that's going to come up in COP28 is trying to get a better understanding of how all these countries in the Middle East are sort of, kind of pledging towards it. But I think there is a focus, whether it's in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, Iran, I think there is this kind of recognition that, there is no choice, right? And so we are seeing in terms of green finance, for example, there's a lot more focus in terms of green finance, ESG financing, and a lot of incentivizing by the government. And as a matter of fact, I'm not that I'm plugging in my panel, but I am in a little way, a lot of that focus is looking at the public and private sector, specifically in terms of, what changes need to be made to be able to reach that net zero target.
I've got two final questions to ask you, then.
Okay, great.
But that's it. All right, how can communities be actively involved in the decision-making process to address local inequalities?
I think, coming from an academic perspective here, I think for us, especially, it's about our students. We have students at Middlesex University, Dubai, that come from, some of them, of course, have lived here in the UAE their entire lives, but most of them are not, UAE nationals, right? A lot of them are from the different parts of the Southeast Asia, Africa, etc. So they, for them, it's a lot of, a case of they're experiencing a different aspect of climate change in their home countries in terms of desertification, flooding, massive levels of climate poverty generally. So I think in terms of academia, I think we have to sort of push the narrative, make people aware of it, provide them the kind of resources to understand the issues. But most importantly, and that was kind of what Yogita was talking about in her presentation, is get them involved. So even on our campus, we don't want to make any big decisions. We want them to come up with tangible, everyday things. And some of the students were like, well, why don't we switch off the electricity at night? All the lights are left on, all the screens are on. Why are we charging our laptops or our desktops? So it's small changes, recycling batteries, for example, just recycling generally. So I think it's those small measures that they can take. And I think one of the biggest things they often say is, what can we do? And I think we tell them, you can do a lot. As a matter of fact, you know what you can do. So a lot of our campaigns have been based on that. And then, of course, it's, a lot of these kids go back to their own countries where they get involved in initiatives, both at a local level and just, we have two of my former MA Global Governance students who've actually started up an ESG, it's a consultancy firm where they're now working with a lot of the big UAE names, both in the public and private sector, in terms of ESG training for their sustainability officers. So here you're seeing some real tangible changes being made. And I think, again, the bottom-up approach is absolutely key in terms of education, but also in terms of any sort of steps in the right direction.
All right, I know you've got to go, so I'll leave it there.
Yes, thank you so much
and
thank you for a great discussion.
Thank you as well.
All of you, hope to meet you again. Thank you so much.
Let's meet in the future. Take care.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Johan, I'm not going to waste any time, so I wanted to ask you a question then. Something that you need to touch upon, but I wanted to ask you this: how do we plan to influence behavioural change within communities to adapt a more sustainable practice? Just the mic, Johan. Just the mic.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, thanks, Robin. That's a great question, and of course, in a way, everything depends on that. How we can motivate people to do things differently. And I just want it's a very complex question, of course, which has many ins and outs. But I just want to go back to that theme of hope to make one point about it, and that is that maybe to say that there are two. So there is kind of, I would say, if you look what are the sources of hope, there is a kind of genuine hope, and there is a kind of hope that has been corrupted by usually what others want us to do. So we have, as human beings, we have a tremendous capacity, I think, to allow our hopes to be formulated by what others want for us, rather than what we want for ourselves, or the kind of actions that we see for ourselves. And consumer society is largely based on that dynamic, that we allow our desires to be formulated by others who benefit from when we think we want what they want us to want. A genuine hope comes from the inside. It's based on curiosity. It's based on a sense of agency. is based on real relationships that we have with the world around us, with the people and the nature in it. And so one of the main ways at a systemic level in which we can influence or create the conditions in which people can actually start to behave differently is by allowing that agentive sense of hope to flourish, by allowing people to develop a sense of agency, a sense of self, and that has to do with this responsibility, in which they see that the world that we live in is ultimately the world that we create ourselves. And I think that is really important. That's why education has to play a huge role. That's why it's important that we bring young people and children into this issue, as many of us have already pointed out. But it's also for higher education really important that we use higher education as an opportunity for people to develop that sense of agency, to exercise curiosity, to learn to look at the world and at themselves through a broader lens than a kind of narrow focus that a lot of people have been brought up with, that people learn to exercise curiosity, take control of their own thought process, and experience the world in a broad perspective. And I think it may sound a little bit dreamy or a little bit irrelevant to talk about these things, and especially in higher education, we are always talking about employability and practicality and kind of direct results. But I think it is by taking that wider perspective that people can develop an awareness and a sense of that agency that lives in themselves. And I think that's a really big part of driving behavioral change in a sustainable way. Otherwise, it's always going to have to be based on punitive mechanisms, as Gufran pointed out, and that's not the way to go. So I think trying to develop the sources of hope in ourselves, vague as that may sound, is an absolute essential for sustainable behavior change.
Brilliant as well. Gufran, I want to get a couple more questions here. Gufran, I know you've touched upon this, but how can communities be more actively involved in designing and implementing health programs to meet, target needs?
Thank you. So usually in the health sector, we talk about community-based participatory research, right? It's to make sure that, again, like we've talked about since the beginning, to make sure that people are involved from the ground up. And usually we'd come with existing frameworks that you can use to be able to make people get involved at the community level. One thing I wanted to point out, though, is one thing that might be interesting also is to look into pre-existing organizations that are already, how can I say that, already an assemblage of people, right? As in, what I'm trying to get here is that climate change is not for a particular segment of society that are more sensitive to the environment cause or to the earth, right? It's something that concerns everyone. So how can we make sure that we involve people who are already mobilized for other issues to jump in on that bandwagon as well? I think would be one of the options. Rabin, I don't know if I answered your question here.
No, you did. And we are coming there of time, and you guys have been very generous. So I'm going to ask you to sum up this question then. Emissions reporting, why do we do it? So Johan, I think you answer that first.
Emissions reporting, why do we do it? Do you mean
why should we?
Us as a university or
anyone? Why should we report on emissions?
I think we should report on emissions because that is one of the big drivers to creating change. So if we have our national, what are they called? The nationally coordinated, nationally agreed emission targets, we need to all report on this in order to get a handle on how we might bring them down. It's of course only data, and it's only one part of the solution. But without knowing what we're doing, we can't really change anything. So I would say that's why that's a very important part of what we do. I do think that the national emission targets more needs to be done to bring them into a global framework. And that's, I think, one of the things that are now on the table in the global stocktake at COP28. But I would say that's, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that does. Gifam, do you have any viewpoints to add before I wrap up?
Yes, from an African perspective and from an African SIDS perspective, it's really to show how negligible our global carbon impact is as compared to the burden that we will be receiving, or we are already experiencing right now, right? And the burden will keep increasing, but our carbon impact is very negligible as compared to the other countries. So that's one of the main reasons why we need to continue monitoring this and publishing those results, right?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to say thank you to all those people who've helped. There's a lot of people behind the scenes, like Billy Armstrong, my colleague as well, Dominic Moore, Christina Rose. So many people have actually helped us. So thank you for that. And one thing I'll say is that I think we need to keep working together for this. So this is why I did this is going to be first of many, to be as transparent as possible and getting this journey together. So we'll definitely like to invite you or Mauritius to future webinars. And thank you, everyone. And for those of you at Middlesex, watch out for the Save Lights campaign. Turn off before you leave during the Christmas holidays. There's lots of things happening within the counter. So we're going to try and be maximize our potential and kind of work on all those kind of actions and desires that we talked about today. So thank you for me, and on behalf of environmental and sustainability team, have a great week. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Robin. Bye.
Bye.